If guns kill people, I guess forks make people fat?
You know what actually kills people? Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Because if you go to FNAF Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, you get the bite of 87. Cause Freddy Fazbear goes, or, and he does the Freddy Fazbear jump scare with his hat and bow tie and his friends Chica, Bonnie, Foxy, and another Freddy that's yellow because he's from William Afton.
I've been on the record in past videos of mine that I didn't like Cyberpunk 2077. Yeah, I had the same problems as everyone else. It was buggy, it was busted, whatever, but I make Fallout New Vegas mod reviews. If bugs were a problem, I would be doing something far more productive with my time. But really though, I had a lot more problems with this game. The first version of this script was written close to when the game came out, and it was scathing. The second version of this script was written when the Edge Runners anime came out, and it was a scathing comparison about how the anime was just a better, idealized advertisement for the game. The third version of this script was written when the massive 2.0 update came out, and it was a lot more positive, but acknowledged that there was still a lot missing when it came to the world of the game. Oh my god, come on. Fine, you guys win. Cyberpunk is good now. No, okay, there's more. I didn't like Cyberpunk more specifically because I felt like it failed not only as a piece of software, but as a game and as a story. There were things I was expecting from CD Projekt's next titanic RPG that just simply were not present. Cyberpunk 2077, on all levels except technical, was what I at that time described as competent at best to friends of mine, and as by the Steam review that I left for it after my first full playthrough. This video is going to be an exploration of those criticisms and the changes that CD Projekt Red made to the game since release to fix or recontextualize the aspects of the game I disliked. Finally, I want to tie it all together with my analysis of the story, in particular the bits that I thought were missing, and why after all this time I'm realizing that their absences are a lot less of a big deal than I initially thought. Cyberpunk 2077's most obvious problems at launch, bugs ignored, were its undercooked gameplay, shallow world, and hollow RPG mechanics. A lot of the commentary I read about the game insisted that, despite its bugs and lackluster gameplay, there was a deep and robust role-playing story experience to be had in 2077. What solidified my full opinion of the game at that time was that I disagreed with that narrative. The game was not just buggy and mechanically unsatisfying, it was also a failed RPG and a messy story. Let's start with the easy stuff. The easiest part of Cyberpunk 2077 to write about is its gameplay, because it's one of the only parts of the game I have nearly no conflicting thoughts about in its current state. Cyberpunk 2077 on release was a sort of boring fun when it all worked. It was fun in the same way that a Ubisoft game can be fun. It's nice to run around a big open sandbox with a gun and shoot it a bunch. What made that endorsement as backhanded as it was is how rarely it ever actually did work. The AI was terrible, and the performance issues crippled what would have otherwise been many high-intensity shootouts or dramatic moments. Further, the fun you could experience in the gameplay aspects of Cyberpunk was fun in a very surface-level kind of way. It was standard at best due to a complete failure of its leveling, crafting, and healing systems, and the severely unfinished police and general AI. On healing first, the healing items used to be items you would find in the open world that you could use pretty much whenever, and they weighed absolutely nothing. The spawn rate for these items wasn't strict either. There were parts of my playthrough where I had 50 or more healing items I could just spam on a hotkey whenever I felt like it. Because these items had no weight or other downsides, I was in no way punished for this. The new system gives you a specific number of charges that an item can be used for, and then it goes on a cooldown. This is such an underrated addition to the game, I'm surprised so few people are talking about it. This changes the whole pace of combat in such a way that, well, it's actually fun to play now. A player now has to think about when they'll need to heal in a combat encounter, and if they need to heal through their charges before the encounter ends, they have to back up and reset their cycle. This adds a layer of strategic consideration that just never existed in the original, where I could be a juggernaut running around the battlefield injecting healing stims without a care as to timing or resource management. There are a handful of perks and cyberware components you can get which increase the speed the healing items recharge, increase the number of charges you have, some that use the charges automatically at a certain HP level, etc. Speaking of perks, we've got to go back to the negative stuff. At launch, Cyberpunk 2077's perk system made me roll my eyes into the back of my head the first time I hovered over a perk and saw a percentage symbol, and then went to the next perk and saw another percentage symbol, and another, and another. It should be common knowledge with more than 20 years worth of video game RPG perk systems that if you're going to include perks in your game, they should provide the player with new abilities, new verbs which they'll be excited to use. I don't want to earn a new perk point just so I can spend it on 15% longer detection and stealth. I want to learn how to dash, and then learn how to air dash, and then when I get the money for new cyber augmentations, gain the ability to double jump. With these 3 new abilities in my collection, I fully opted out of using cars for travel in the downtown cores of the map. I learned on my own the correct sequence I could string these abilities together to outrun denser city traffic and never lose momentum. That is what a good perk system can provide, and that's what Cyberpunk's 2.0 update gave me. Rather than different screens for different disciplines and subdisciplines, Cyberpunk 2.0 adds perk trees, with extremely strong perks at the very top of the trees. What this new system does particularly well is incentivizing specialization. In my launch playthrough, I was a stealth hacker who also had enough skill with guns and enough toughness to win a firefight whenever I got bored of methodically taking down enemies one at a time. I could do stealth, hack, shoot, and rip doors off their hinges because the game's perk systems never gave me a reason to care enough about one of these playstyles to commit. Cyberpunk 2.0 did. When I first started, I tried to recreate my build as much as I could before realizing I just couldn't, so I spec'd heavily into quick hacking and technical abilities which gave me access to all those Deus Ex ventilation shafts through which I could remotely detonate the skull of any guard within 10 kilometers of me.
A bomb.
As a quality of life feature, the game gives you the ability to respec all of your perks and attribute points exactly once, and so around the mid-game I saw a video of a guy on Twitter showing off a katana build, and realized how much fun it would be to hard spec into a speed build, and so I did. Hacking felt overpowered because I was taking down 5 to 15 enemies from behind cover without sending or receiving a single shot, and my speed build felt even better because with all the perks and augmentations I felt like I was playing as the Flash, zipping around the battlefield taking down enemies who were dead before they could even see me there. This is the brilliance that an RPG perk and skill system can provide if executed properly. If you follow the directives the game gives you, you have multiple choices for a player combat build that all fulfill a distinct power fantasy. With a maxed out skill tree in anything, you will feel overpowered when you opt in for the type of experience that perk tree enhances. The combat, technical aspects, and AI were the primary reason I considered this a bad game at launch, and the perk system was the cause of one half of why I considered Cyberpunk to be a poor RPG. Thankfully, this was the side of the coin that CD Projekt did polish. But the other half of that opinion is something that remains to this day, the absolute joke that is the life path system. CD Projekt's previous Witcher games worked off of an established character in Geralt of Rivia who the player could influence the choices and disposition of, but who they could not meaningfully alter. This, for the game and story The Witcher was, made sense. Geralt is an established character, not just from the games, but through a series of novels, and as such it would be strange if the player could decide that Geralt was not in fact a Witcher at all, but a court jester or a hermit alchemist. The world that 2077 pulls from is too an established one, but rather than pulling from a specific story with a set main protagonist, 2077 is built from the world of Cyberpunk 2020, a tabletop RPG. Call me a fool, but I had at least some expectations that as a player of Cyberpunk 2077, I would have a much more hands-on role to define my character like you could in the tabletop game. These expectations were reinforced pre-release by the most bad faith piece of marketing in the game's history, the Life Paths trailer. I was excited for the game before this trailer, don't get me wrong, but I didn't buy into the rabid level of hype until this trailer dropped. You're telling me this massive open world RPG doesn't just have choices within the story, but a choice of character background at the beginning that would change everything? They showed this off almost like it was 3 different campaigns, or at minimum 3 different campaign experiences. I had imagined each life path having its own unique quests throughout the story, even potentially exclusive endings. An RPG with 3 different campaigns, what a thought. The 3 life paths available were Nomad, Street Kid, and Corpo, and none of them were what I expected them to be. They were what they were in the trailer, I'll give CD Projekt that much, but only with the caveat that they are only what they were in the trailer. The unfortunate fact about life paths is that if you've seen the life paths trailer, you've seen a good amount of the life path specific content and gotten the gist of all of it. Life paths were advertised as an important choice that would shape the way you saw and interacted with Night City, but they weren't. Instead, they're intros that characters will occasionally call back to with no real consequence. The only significant thing the life paths decide is how your character reaches the beginning of the game that is completely unchanged between the 3 paths. In the Nomad path, V is estranged from their clan of desert wanderers and take up a dangerous job which will lead them into Night City, meeting and befriending Jackie Wells. In the Street Kid path, V is a lowlife who picks up a carjacking job and comes into conflict with Jackie Wells, ultimately ending up befriending him. As a corpo, V inexplicably was friends with Jackie from the very beginning, and he helps V get back on their feet after they get fired from their job at Arasaka, the big evil corporation at the center of the game's plot. Regardless of the life path you choose, you start the game as a plucky merc trying to make it big in Night City with Jackie Wells. Once I realized how shallow the life path content was, Cyberpunk was, I'll be real, basically dead to me. How could this ever be a deep role-playing experience when the first major choice the game gives you turned out to be not half, not even quarter, but eighth baked? This shit's still in the mixing bowl. For what I was looking for out of Cyberpunk, this was a tragic sign of the unfinished nature of the game at the time I first played it. For the game it actually is, and was under all the bugs, the life paths are not different role-playing paths, but instead flavors. Cyberpunk 2077 sold me on character creation and role-playing, but at the end of the day, V is just another Geralt. That's fine, it's cool for an action RPG, whatever, but I hope you can understand how my frustration developed in that first playthrough. Each of the life paths get occasional dialogue options which either make reference explicitly to your character's past, or more subtly implying their past through use of skills or knowledge that only a person from that life path would have. My favorite life path was Corpo, because it gave my V multiple opportunities in the main game to express cynicism, pick up on lies, and abuse customer service workers.
I'll go ahead and notify Taki-san of your arrival.
Shit, no good. Not part of the plan. Talk her up, V. Stall.
Have I asked you to do that?
No, I just thought that since...
Who asked you to think?
I noticed that in the Phantom Liberty expansion there were a lot more of these life path options, perhaps as a quiet nod or admission to the system's general absence from the main game, which is appreciated. What I can say about the life paths is that they point generally to the reality of 2077, that it isn't a super deep RPG like I hoped. It's a story about their character, not yours. I don't mind that now, I even like it a lot now, but it's not what I was looking for or what I wanted, nor is it what they sold to me in the hype periods before release. Broadly speaking, there is no better selling point for Cyberpunk 2077 than the spectacle of Night City. I use the word spectacle purposefully, and not entirely cynically. Critics of 2077 would tell you that the city is all flash and no bang, that it's grand and beautiful, but missing everything that would make it feel like a living, breathing world. One of the funniest examples of this at launch was a lack of complicated pedestrian and traffic pathing. Passers-by would walk down a street and then back up the same street all day. Certain cars would loop the block over and over again, like a parent looking for parking at hockey practice until the player did something to disrupt traffic, like set off an explosion or park a car horizontally on the road, at which point their pathing would be interrupted and they would just sit in the same spot until the obstacle was removed. Only a small few sections of Night City were vertically explorable, and many of the shops and street stalls were unable to be interacted with. This much is what they fixed. The world is now much more stable, much more reactive, and much more interactable. The metro system is working, you can drink at bars, you can participate in a whole bunch of open world side activities, and just generally do your own thing. Now onto the problems. Night City is laid out believably, with several districts, all with their own unique identities, styles, and influences. One of my biggest criticisms of Cyberpunk's world, though, is how little I actually learned about the gangs and corporations of Night City in my playthroughs of the game. There is plenty to learn, there is lots of lore, but I am, believe it or not, an outspoken lore hater, an opinion I think is among my most controversial. In a lot of games, lore is just something to chew on if you're into that sort of thing, rather than an active participant in the way a player experiences the game and its story. You can, probably will, go through a playthrough of Cyberpunk 2077 during which the Arasaka Corporation is the primary antagonist, and all you'll really ascertain about what they are is they're the big evil Japanese corporation with the big robot guy, and Keanu Reeves hates them a whole bunch. At launch, and even now, Night City is a spectacle in the cynical sense of the word. It is a big pretty picture that gives the illusion of a world. CD Projekt Red fixed the gameplay parts of the illusion, but not necessarily the story parts. I would lose myself in this city's streets, but more because it's pretty and fun to run around in than for any macro level connection to the structures of this world. Was I ever made to care about who 6th Street was? No matter how interesting Night Corp or Biotechnica are, the game never really pushed me to care by giving that lore stakes that I felt in the missions they were casually brought up in. The game doesn't have to spoon feed me information. I don't mind having to read terminal entries, but I wish the information I found on them was more directly relevant to what there was to do in Night City. It's a beautiful place with lots to do and lots of different places to explore, but it's not everything that it could have been. While I want to get into the story of the game's expansion, Phantom Liberty, later, I want to bring it up again here because, like with the Life Path dialogue, it seems to already be wise to this critique. The expansion takes place in a new Night City district called Dogtown, a completely free economic zone under the dictatorship of essentially an ANCAP warlord. The main questline of the expansion deals extensively with the leader and micro-world of Dogtown in a way much of the main game refuses to. I cared about Kurt Hansen and his crew because they played a central role in the story I was playing and influencing.
So me. Care to introduce your friends? It's not often I'm simply not familiar with guests attending my own party. And I never forget a face. Kurt Hansen.
Even when it tried to, and it wanted to, the main game never truly made me care about Arasaka, about Militech, the Mox, or Maelstrom beyond what they were doing. I cared about their actions rather than their identity, which essentially meant you could sub in any one gang for any other gang, or any corporation for any other corporation, and the story as is would remain pretty much the same. There is a commentary to be made here. That right there is actually an interesting idea, that all the gangs and corporations in a world like this are essentially different flavors of the same skyscrapers and goons to shoot. The game could have put more effort into prolonged commentary on what this means in political terms, in social terms, or merely just for V as a character, but it doesn't even engage with that sort of idea superficially. When I'm evaluating the merits of any given narrative, be it in a video game or any other medium, I give a lot of credit to cohesiveness. This is an idea I've put forth several times on this channel, dating back to my videos on Fallout 1 and 2. I love it when all the different narrative aspects of a game coalesce in such a way that they all feel essential to one another. This is a common thread in many of my favorite games. A truly great open world game will have a central idea, concept, or theme that the entire game is working towards, both in its main quest and in its side quests. One of the biggest critiques that YouTube video essay legend Noah Caldwell-Gervais levies at Cyberpunk 2077 is that it is, rather than a cohesive work as I described, a collection of references and genre conventions that each individually point to a different idea while engaging with none of them fully and all of them separately, forming a messy scattershot when viewing the product in totality. Cyberpunk 2077 is a deeply referential game. It pulls from so many different places, it feels kind of like the writers sat around a table and took turns going, what if we made a quest about, and then threw a dart at a spinning board with every trope or example of sci-fi and cyberpunk. What if we made a detective noir story? What if we made a quest about AI? What if we talked about sex work for a while? What if we had the red pill and the blue pill from the Matrix? At every turn, Cyberpunk takes an idea off of the great pile of established cyberpunk canon and puts it on one of those bulky IKEA cube shelves, displayed nicely next to the Terminator pop vinyl and the Blade Runner soundtrack. This situation is problematic because having almost all of the game's quests be tropes or riffs on established ideas make the product as a whole feel cheap in a theme park kind of way. Even the most emotionally, thematically, or philosophically rich topics covered by Cyberpunk side quests are quickly put on that rickety IKEA shelf and left to collect dust, where they could have been picked up again later in different stories. A major side quest chain involves knocking out mini-bosses all over the world map called cyberpsychos, people who've gone insane from the sheer amount of technology they've augmented themselves with. You get this job from former news reporter Regina Jones, who urges you to take down but not kill these cyberpsychos and find out as much information as you can about what caused their meltdowns, all under the pretense that Jones wants to research and run tests to discover what cyberpsychosis really is, and if it can be treated. These mini-bosses are fun, and some are super creative, and each one has a little data entry somewhere, which will give you a little bit of insight into their life story and why they are the way they are. What you find in this quest is 17 extremely mentally ill people, and almost all of them had the seeds of that illness a good while before their implant spree began. Most of them started to build up implants because of economic insecurity. They needed the implants to keep up at work, they needed them to stay safe from gang harassment, paranoia, depression, and anxiety caused by by the economic systems of Night City started their dive into augmentation, which only made the problem worse. Throughout the game, cyberpsychosis is treated by V and by other characters like a consequence strictly of technology itself. But this quest breaks that assumption apart by highlighting the social factors of mental illness and violence. This should be an incredibly poignant piece of knowledge for both V and the player to have. In Cyberpunk, the conditions of the world around these people create the mental illness, and they augment after the fact. There's a data shard you can find titled "The Truth About Cyberpsychosis," which says as much. Quote, "Our world is subject to extensive dehumanization. Some of us begin to lose sight of what's human. We slip into feelings of total alienation and deep-rooted panic. The most frightening component to all of this is that most will never be diagnosed. Not all cyberpsychos are known war veterans or former mercenaries equipped with Sandevistan reflex tech. Many cyberpsychos in our world possess only a single implant, a knee, a liver. They are unseen, unnoticed. They lock themselves up and shut out their friends, colleagues, and loved ones. The world outside of the net and their delusions have disappeared from conscious thought. They are sick and alone, and no one is doing a thing about it." End quote. This is important, this is compelling, but this isn't a quest where you go to markers on the map and shoot until the cyberpsycho stops moving, and once you do that 17 times, Regina meets you and goes, "Well, we haven't heard of many cyberpsychos recently, so great job. We're still doing the experiments to figure out what caused all this and how we can fix it. Anyway, thanks for your work. Here's a unique pair of pants you can wear as a reward. See you never."
Oh my god, what happened here?
Yeah, we're all trying to find the guy who did this and give him a spanking.
It's obviously this guy, right?
We already figured out what caused all this, and it's pretty intuitive as to how we can fix it. But even if the game or Regina refuse to take such a stance, it seems nonsensical that V or even Johnny doesn't. Not in this quest, not in future quests, now that you have this knowledge. You shoot a bunch, an idea is presented, and it's put on the shelf. When it comes to this quest and a handful of the longer chain-style quests in the game, the problem is alleviated slightly by the long-form nature, giving you the illusion that this is a widely impactful idea being discussed, but it's shallow. It fixes the problem of the ideas being relegated to singular quests by making those quests longer. At the end of the day, it's still one quest. This, at first glance, doesn't help the problem that these quests seem disconnected from each other and the wider story being told. That at first glance part will be important later. Okay, wait, just because you've watched this long, I want to let you folks in on an industry secret here. I'm going to teach you all how to be a funny YouTube video essayist. Okay, so first, we're going to record that line again. The game's solution, yada yada yada, at first glance, doesn't help the problem that these quests seem disconnected from each other and the wider story being told. Okay, so now that you've laid out your line, which extremely obviously points to a contradiction or a twist you're leading up to, here's how you do it. Here's how you be the funny guy. Foreshadowing is a literary device. You did it. And last thing, make sure the audio cuts into the next part of the recording too, like this. I actually love a lot of the side quests in this game, but I can't help but feel a sudden urge to shrug when they finish. Their half-explored ideas are wrapped up and I go back to beating up mentally ill people on the street. Sorry, wrong footage. One of my favorite side quests in the game was one that dealt explicitly with Delamain, an AI taxi network that you discover to be on the verge of sentience. There's a private eye side quest involving Lizzie Wizzy, a chrome pop star very awkwardly voice acted by Grimes.
Who is Johnny?
He's my muse and he also runs the cult that I'm in.
Which handles the commodification of art and the people who make it. There are so many quests with so many interesting concepts in Cyberpunk 2077, but these side jobs are more often than not derivative or shallow in the extent to which they're willing to grapple with their own ideas. And I think that's a shame. A lot of people on the left believe that Cyberpunk 2077 is a story which fundamentally misunderstands the politics inherent in the cyberpunk genre, and acts as a poor representation of the medium through its poor representation of the medium's political aspects. This problem is in a lot of ways an off-angled amplifier of the problems that Noah outlined in his video, that the ideas the game had were derivative and poorly fleshed out. This is a problem on its own, but it's even more damningly a problem when these ideas are specifically political ideas that, ought to have things like nuance and things to say. When it comes to politics, Cyberpunk 2077 makes a lot of noise, but doesn't end up saying very much. Capitalism bad. It gets that far, but it specifically fails to point towards any alternative. The best word for this game's politics is cynical. Your constant companion throughout the game is Keanu Reeves' Johnny Silverhand, a jaded punk who reiterates several times in the game his issues with the system, man. But their Silverhandian solution to the matter is blowing shit up as a grand gesture. The political irony of Silverhand as a character is that he speaks more outwardly than anyone else about the terrible system the world of the game is caught up in, but simultaneously, Johnny doesn't have a single hint of class consciousness in any bone of his digital body. To Johnny, politics is a war between him and the big skyscrapers rather than any kind of prolonged struggle between classes. Whether you choose to believe in and trust Johnny on these matters makes little difference in the individualized frame in which we view Cyberpunk 2077's politics. For V, and for Johnny, and for everyone else, politics is something that a group of people does to you, rather than what it really is, something a group of people does to another group of people which you are a part of. If the game wants to be punk, it should start by overturning narratives, and one narrative it fails dreadfully to even examine is the narrative of self-reliance, a narrative which explicitly serves the ruling class antagonists of the game. So, the big thinky man used his big thinky words to make his video essay about a video game all about politics, and now I'm mad for reasons I can't really explain. And I understand that. I understand it especially because I think that this perspective is frankly dumb. I, for once in my life, agree that people should stop forcing politics into video games. Because Cyberpunk 2077 could have been a political game. It could have grappled with its own ideas through the lens of politics, but it doesn't. And if that was it, I would feel cheated. I did feel cheated. Because I didn't realize that there was a whole other lens through which all of this actually makes sense. Let this mark the point in the video where the big thinky man stops making his video essay about video games, about politics, and starts making it about philosophy. Yup, the thing that pushed me over the line from passively being interested in making this video to being more actively excited to write is that, forgive me God, I started reading the French existentialists again. Yup, that's right, old Sartre, Camus, Simone de Beauvoir, and probably my favorite, Danish twink for God, Soren Kierkegaard. If you have a more useful degree or just generally use your time better than I do, existentialism is a branch of philosophy that deals with all the questions you ask yourself at big junctions in your life where you have to make important decisions. What should I do with my life? Do I have a purpose? Is there a God? Do you think God stays in heaven because he too lives in fear of what he's created? There's a lot of nuance to how different existentialists answer these kinds of questions, but for most of them on a super broad level, this is the existentialist take. As humans in a world without direct intervention by God, we're stuck in a situation where we have total unguided freedom to decide what we think is right or wrong, and what we should do in every moment of choice in our lives. Often, the choices we have on hand don't make any sense. This is and should be absolutely terrifying, because life would be a lot easier if we had a God on our shoulder, or a YouTube video essayist to tell us what to think about everything, but we don't. Yet, in the absence of objectively present guidance, existentialists tend to believe that we should embrace the freedom to live authentically, i.e. not be stuck under all the arbitrary labels we filter our conduct through. Have you ever seen those TikToks or posts about how the person posting has different personalities that they use for different friend groups and get a little physically repulsed by it? Jean-Paul Sartre would be reaching for a gun. A big critique that can be made of existentialism is that, especially compared to a lot of the philosophy happening in and around its time, existentialism can be read as very individualistic. It has very little to do with society as a whole, or with the institutions or power structures which make people ask existentialist questions. I don't necessarily disagree to the extent that I don't think that you should go around calling yourself an existentialist. First of all, because grow up, cringe. Second of all, because it does get a little interior and it lacks the social element that a lot of other ism philosophies can offer you. That being said, there's still a lot to like here. Abandoning labels and acting authentically and freely, understanding that the pressures you feel to be this or that are socially constructed and not really worth worrying about. That's all cool. It's almost cool enough for me to forgive all of these writers for being French. What I found in my most recent playthrough of Cyberpunk 2077 is that it is drenched in this stuff, in existentialist themes and ideas, and it does everything I said it didn't with that framework. The way that the main questline of the game is paced has a lot more to do with the development of V than the development of the plot. Act 1 is marked by an extreme naivete in V. After the life path prologue streamlines V into one flavor or another of the street kid mercenary, and V settles into their new life as partner and friend of Jackie Wells, the animating force in their life is an ambition to make it big. All that V and Jackie want at the start of the game is to be Night City legends, and the conversation V has with big-time fixer Dexter Deshawn Deshawn puts a spotlight on what the first conception of the game's theme might be.
Would you rather live in peace as Mr. Nobody, die ripe, old, and smelling slightly of urine, or go down for all times in a blaze of glory, smelling near like posies, without seeing your 30th?
If you take it at face value, this is really clumsy, right? The game telling you what you should think the game is about sucks. It's storytelling spoon-fed to you like you can't interpret the ideas yourself. But I think that there are two things which redeem this. First of all, how juvenile and simple the idea is reflects on V. This question of whether V is to be a legend dying in a blaze of glory or a peaceful nobody is exactly the kind of question V would ask and want to answer. It's oversimplified, it's childish, it's naive. So is V. The second part lies in framing. That this conversation is had with Dexter Deshawn is not insignificant. Before this conversation, V and Jackie fanboy over him for a minute, hype him up as some big deal businessman. He picks you up in his fancy car smoking cigars, and the subtext of this question is one of judgment. V's answer, whichever it is an honest one, but it's done with a set of much richer than you eyes watching. There's also the fact that the question itself has a lot more to do with how people see you than who you are. If you weren't thinking too much, you might hear this conversation and mistake it as an earnest and failed communication of the theme. Instead, it's a shallow pre-existentialist questioning of what it means to live a good life, and both answers have much more to do with how you're perceived than what you are or what you do. Die a legend or live peacefully as a nobody. The question going unanswered, and the question the rest of the game will try to answer, is legend to whom? Nobody to whom? V's naivete is doubled in the character of Jackie Wells, a bright-eyed merc just like you who only wants to make it big. And that he is so focused on this goal makes it all the more tragic when that very ambition gets him killed in the job for Dexter Deshawn, in a job chasing the dream that one day people would care who he was. We did. His family did. His girlfriend Misty did. The allure of Night City legend, that kind of label, is a whole other beast. This heist involves stealing an experimental data shard from the Arasaka Corporation, and naturally everything goes wrong, leading to V having to insert the shard into his head where it must remain permanently unless V wants to die and destroy the shard at once. Jackie's death in the first big job opens up the idea of questioning this way of life as a mercenary, the glory first, reputation first grind set. This job also opens up V's relationship to Johnny Silverhand, the personality construct contained in the shard whose consciousness begins to battle for territory in V's head, whether Johnny wants it to or not.
Stick some iron in your mouth and pull the trigger.
I love Johnny. The game loves Johnny too. Before V gets Johnny's personality construct in his head, all of the quest names are generic ones, like The Heist or The Ripper Doc. But once Act 1 concludes and you wake up in your apartment with Johnny, every quest title in the game is a song title, specifically a song title of a song Johnny would have liked. Transmission, Search and Destroy, Dream On, Happy Together, Violence, like as in the one by Grimes. Not sure that'd be Johnny's thing. The reason Johnny works so well as a character in this story is because he fits perfectly into the existentialist theme I've been alluding to so far. Johnny is exactly what V and Jackie wanted to be. He became a Night City legend, partially for his music career as the lead singer of Refused, but also as the orchestrator of an attack on Arasaka Tower which led to his death and current state as a personality construct. He is well known, even in 2077. He was rich, he was famous. But at the start of your relationship with him, the most defining characteristic of Johnny is that he's awful. Johnny's an asshole. He's a cynic. He's a narcissist who thinks he changed the world. As V's brain is split between his personality and Johnny's, so is the plot of the main story split between V's and Johnny's inclination towards dying in a blaze of glory, and V's now multiple experiences pointing to the fact that this is just straightforwardly a meaningless and terrible idea. While Cyberpunk isn't exceptional as an RPG, it is certainly good, in large part due to the ability of the player to answer the question of which side of V to follow in a myriad of different contexts and ways, rather than just having this theme merely play out in the game's main story. A strong majority of the main and side quests directly relate back to fundamental questions in existentialist philosophy. The most well-discussed side mission in Cyberpunk is a chain of quests which surrounds a convicted murderer who turned to God, and who's been convinced by a media producer to make a film where he's crucified, with you as the person nailing him to the cross. Well, film is misleading. The game has something called a brain dance, which is kind of like a VR movie where you can feel what's going on. It's the most infuriating part of any mission that includes it, and the brain dance sections are only entertaining in their capacity to exist as an in-game YouTube poop maker.
Alright, V, eyes open. Gotta find out where Yorinobu's keeping the relic.
You look like a cut of fuckable meat. You fuckable, like a cut of fuckable, a cut of fuckable meat. You fuckable meat.
But anyway, as the player, you have full autonomy to refuse to participate in the crucifixion. But the criminal in question, Joshua, asks you genuinely to do this. He is a true believer, and this is what he believes will give his life the most meaning and indeed redemption. It is also absolutely exploitation on the part of the studio and the producer, who couldn't give a shit about Joshua or you, and it's the player's job to weigh these factors and decide whether you are willing to fulfill Joshua's wish or not. The game gives this crucifixion the gravity it deserves. It is somber like nothing outside of the game's endings really is, and crucially, this quest is in line with the ideas and questions the main story is asking you. While you are busy worrying about whether to fulfill your mercenary expectations or live as normally as you can, this side quest briefly amps the exact same question up to 11. What if you really wanted, more than anything in the world, to be crucified and killed on camera? And if you wanted that, if you wanted to die on the cross and someone else had the ability to stop you, should they? Is it their right to deny you of that if the alternative is life in prison? Die a legend or live the rest of your life as a nobody is flipped to a circumstance where you are not the individual making the choice, but the individual making the choice for another person who's already made up their mind.
Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit.
Amen.
Speaking of a morally gut-wrenching story where you have to decide whether individual autonomy is worth questionable surroundings and consequences, it's time to talk about the main story to Cyberpunk's expansion, Phantom Liberty. Before the analysis part really starts, here's my review.
Bro, please, bro.
Okay, summary time. Song So-mi is a netrunner blackmailed into employment for the new United States of America, basically the government, to reach so far deep into cyberspace so often that she's being slowly killed. V is led into Dogtown by So-mi to save the president from their spaceship being shot out of the sky. V meets the president, V meets Idris Elba, all the guns are green, and So-mi is captured by the mayor/warlord of Dogtown. Surprise though, So-mi was the one who shot down the space shuttle so that she could escape from the government and be free of her status as a pawn under their thumb. Idris wants V to take So-mi in for the government. So-mi wants V to play along long enough so that in the end they betray them and So-mi can escape to a colony on the moon. Both parties promise that they can cure V, but only the NUSA can actually fulfill that promise, and at the cost of So-mi returning to her status as essentially a slave being continually tortured by the government, until she dies and is no longer useful as an asset. I really didn't want this video to be one of those analysis videos where the guy making it just explains the plot at you for 16 hours while occasionally stopping to say, "Oh, I think this is good," or "Oh, I think the person who wrote this should die in a fire," before continuing on and doing that over and over again. So as far as summary goes, that's all we need. I hope it was enough. Okay, moving on. This situation is pretty close to the quest with Joshua and the crucifixion on a grander, more complicated, more emotional, and more consequential scale. What is So-mi's freedom worth to V, especially at the end when they realize she can't help them? What about once they realize that the NUSA can genuinely keep V alive so that they can live a normal, long life? Is that life even worth it if it means V knows So-mi is somewhere plunging deep enough into cyberspace to fry her brain on a daily basis? So-mi betrays the president. In the past, she betrayed Reed, that's Idris, and at the end, if V chooses to trust her, she betrays V too, all so that she can escape and live the rest of her probably short life free. And despite it all, that's kind of endearing. I get it. I don't blame her for a second for doing all of this to be free. This expansion takes the idea of playing with someone else's autonomy developed in the Sinnerman questline and relates it even more to V, because who is so me except V in an even worse situation, forced to interface with a technology that kills them slowly, enveloped in a system which binds them to an unfulfilling life, and all they want to do is live on their own terms. I sent So-Mi to the moon, by the way, if you couldn't already tell. We'll discuss the alternative ending you get if you side against her in the ending section later, but for now, autonomy, freedom, choice, and finding a meaningful life. The value and frightening uncertainty present in individual autonomy you would read in SART is found in the quest where you decide whether a brothel should be controlled by a gang, who would provide full protection and make all the decisions, or by the sex workers themselves, who would be able to hopefully create more favorable working conditions with uncertainty regarding future safety. Or the quest where you decide the fate of that group of rogue sentient AI taxis, whether they should be set free to make choices on their own in a world they are, as taxis, woefully under-equipped to live in. On the political side of things, the big quest mentioned in the video that I refuse to name is one in which V begins to find and receive messages from a group supposedly called the Bartmoss Collective, an ostensibly left-wing forum where you can find all shapes of completely random jargon that sounds vaguely revolutionary, but also a lot like bullshit, and Johnny tells V as much throughout their entire journey to find this supposed group. V is sent on a multi-step goose chase over the promise generated by a group saying things like, "The best weapon against capitalism is uninterrupted meditation." All the while Johnny, allegedly the most left-wing of the main characters, for certain the most outwardly ideological, sees this whole ordeal as a distraction and a farce. And as it turns out, correctly so, as V finally makes it through all of the puzzles and stops only to find a hacked fortune teller and a message telling you got trolled.
Class division is the breeding ground of anarchy.
Wait, what the hell is this?
What it looks like. Swedenborg Riviera. Ha! Come one, come all for the profit of Night City. Ha! Oh, that's too good. A wind-up philosopher in a box. Hand me a couple of eddies. See what he cranks out next.
Your luck shall turn around when the means of production will flow on an endless stream of endorphins.
V can choose to leave it alone and let it keep enticing the suckers, shut the operation down, or, if you're feeling funny and have the hacking skill for it, crank the spam up to 11 and make the machine send out even more leftist theory babble, enticing those who don't know any better. And you know, a lot of people with similar politics to me got really bent out of shape over this quest, and honestly, I can understand why. Taking into consideration the arguments made previously about the game being overly focused on the individual and lacking any understanding of collective action, it's enticing to start this quest and expect the twist to be, oh look, Johnny's wrong, there is an underground communist organization in Night City proving that real systemic change only comes from cooperation and unity and all that nice stuff. But the twist is actually that Johnny was right. You were an idiot for thinking something like this in this city would ever really come true. And on the surface, in isolation, that sounds bad.
I know that sounds bad.
It sounds, dare I say it, neoliberal in its messaging. That the only thing that's real is the individual. That you're a fool for thinking collectively. That you're better off only thinking about yourself. It stings. But the fact that it stings, to me, should tell you something. If this quest was meant to earnestly preach a neoliberal message, the ending would have been a booyah. You would have found the real meeting and exposed them for all their jargon being made up, or you would have found the fortune teller and gone, thank God, right? The finale of this quest is funny, and it's meant to be funny, but it's a dark funny. It's a kinda sad funny. I think this quest isn't saying there is nothing except the individual and no attempt at collective action is worthwhile, like so many people do. I think this quest is saying there's nothing except the individual in this city, and that sucks. Johnny doesn't keep warding you away from finding the collective because he thinks radical political organization is bad. Obviously, he doesn't think that. That's his whole thing. He wards you away because he knows what's coming and is annoyed by your naivete on the matter. This idea plays directly into the endings, which are coming up, but for now, one of the most often quoted parts of Cyberpunk 27 has a lot to say on the matter. When I was on the bus 6 months ago, I had a revelation about the game's links to two philosophers I had been reading that I thought was so niche and profound nobody could have ever written about it, and then I googled it and found an article that wrote about it. So even though I technically came up with it in isolation, I'm still gonna cite it and quote from it, because after reading it, my ideas are so mixed up with theirs that what else is there for me to do? In 2021, Lapo Lapin wrote an article for Blood Knife titled The Hegelian Emptiness of Cyberpunk 2077, which outlines two perspectives on what Cyberpunk should have been as a political and philosophical work. Two perspectives which exactly matched how I wanted the game to be at launch and how I love it to be right now. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, as simply as I can put it, was really interested in the development of super eagle-eye macro-level human affairs. His philosophy is a philosophy of change over time, of grand narratives and ideas changing gradually before our eyes towards an absolute truth. A Hegelian, or as the article points out, a Marxist, as Marx was inspired by Hegel, would want Cyberpunk to explore, quote, which permutations global capital will morph into, what Hydra-like heads will sprout when the current ones are mulked. In creating or consuming this materialist Hegelian cyberpunk, the question we so often want an answer to is simply this one: what will happen to the world if market forces are left unchecked? End quote. Cyberpunk 2077 gives us a pretty straightforward answer to this. The world would be shit. Everyone would be unhappy. But crucially, it fails to be truly Hegelian or Marxist because it fails to plot a path forward. 2077, as we have explored, isn't too concerned with collective action, revolution, or systemic change. Cyberpunk 2077 is about V, about their life, not the life of the civilization they exist in. This is where the second perspective comes in and where I can return to Danish twink for God, sorry Kirk, we are so back! Whereas Hegel's a philosopher whose main project was to map out the inner soul of humanity and chart its grand dialectical movements, a good amount of Kierkegaard's work can be seen as an attempt to understand subjectivity, the experiences of the individual, what it means to be an individual, what that experience is truly like. Quoting around Lapin again, quote, Kierkegaard's existentialism rebels against the Hegelian fixation with the big picture. What does it matter to us in our daily struggles to find meaning in what we do? If Cyberpunk wants to remain a viable inspiration for political action, it requires a reappraisal of the forgotten Kierkegaardian aspects of the genre. The question of what subjectivity under capitalism is like, and how subjectivity can be a locus of resistance against the logic of the market. End quote. Taken this way, 2077 is not the neoliberal, cynical work of anti-politics so many on the left have framed it as. It's just not politically engaged through the Hegelian paradigm we so often expect when we think of politics. When we think of what politics is, we think huge structures, mass protests, elections maybe, massive change, revolution, collective action. Rarely do we consider the political as we experience it as subjects. The more subject-focused strategy of the game's politics is associated with the subject-focused nature of existentialist philosophy and the subject-focused nature of the game's storytelling. As a game focused on the particular, on the interior experiences of people, the game's characters are fundamental to everything it tries to pull off, whether that's a political or philosophical treatise or an entertaining story. It's probably good then that the characters in the game slap. When Night City is crushing V under its boot, when V becomes disillusioned with their old goal of becoming a Night City legend and loses their best friend, when V faces their inevitable mortality in more literal manifestation than ever before, like for any person, the fulfillment and happiness V is temporarily granted at points in the story all tie back to the connections they create and the people they trust and love. There are 4 romanceable companions in the game, and first little bit of criticism in a while, it is very much clear development efforts were not spread amongst these characters equally. I'll only mention it briefly because my point with the companions has very little to do with them, but I didn't really love either River or Carrie. This might just be because I'm a straight male. But I don't think so, because my aversion to these characters has a lot less to do with their appearances or their performances, but just how they're written. River is a cop, no thanks, and Carrie to me is kind of pathetic, even if his character development is kind of fun. Thankfully for this analysis, these two characters and their quest lines have basically nothing to do with the point I want to tee up, so I'll quickly move on to the 2 female companions, their stories, and how they both end up leaving Night City. Judy is a character V meets pretty early in the game and is the love interest for gay female Vs. She's a hacker, a local, and importantly, facing a lot of the same struggles as V. Early in the main plot, Judy loses the person closest to her, just like V. She is living under the boot of Night City's systems and society. Judy is a fundamentally unhappy person in this city, and in what I believe to be her best ending, she decides to leave it all behind, to get away from a city where there is so much and nothing for her. Rather than remaining in her role, her identity as a member of one of Night City's gangs, the Mox, or as a Night City resident at all, she chooses to take the leap of faith and seek happiness elsewhere. Her quest is existentialist and, more importantly, emotional, especially for V as someone struggling with similar things. And V even gets the option at the end to follow in Judy's footsteps if they get close to my favorite romance interest, Panam Palmer. Panam is unique among the game's core characters as the only one not really sold on Night City's promises. She is an outsider, a nomad, roaming the desert with her clan and only really going into the city when she needs to. What Panam exposes to V is, in my opinion, the most important part of V's entire journey. First is the idea that exists with all of their romanceable interests. The idea that human connection and love is a uniquely powerful force in a society which seeks so hard to isolate and atomize. These sorts of connections are, in the Kierkegaardian way, human and powerful in a way no grand revolutionary network or collective could be, especially in a place like this. The individual experience of connecting with another is held far and above any potential experience of solidarity with the masses of Night City or any kind of absolute. Not because these masses are bad or because solidarity with them would be phony or not worthwhile, but just due to the sheer magnitude of feeling experienced in friendship and in love. The second aspect is the aspect more unique to Panam and to a lesser extent Judy. That being that Panam's questline exposes V to the reality that there's more to life than the daily struggle for money and survival you get so swept up in as a hostage of Night City's neon and monolithic skyscrapers. This is something that happens to us in real life too, by the way. If you're like me and you've only ever lived in big cities and most of your time spent away from those cities or spent in other big cities, you kind of forget that there are other ways of life. You will, for one reason or another, find yourself in a small town or out in the country and stop to think, because you can finally hear yourself think, because you've never experienced quiet like this in your life. None of this is to say that small town country life is perfect or even preferable to life in the city, but merely that when you're caught in an environment that's so consistently loud and fast, you forget that there was ever an alternative. But there is, and it's out here, deep in the quiet desert. After completing Panam's questline, the game opens up a new ending for you to, like Judy, skip town with your new family. If it's not already clear, this is my favorite ending to the game, but let's talk about the other ones too. Tying together everything we've discussed, from the Night City legend to the humble nobody to existentialist philosophy to love and human connection, is a set of endings which all represent a way for V to move on, to move forward with their life more or less on their terms. I say more or less there because 2077 has two endings which are generally considered to be the bad endings, because both involve in one sense or another giving up, refusing to choose for yourself, or generally just letting things happen. After the symptoms of V's condition become unbearable and they have to decide what it is they need to do, a member of the Arasaka dynasty tells V that they can just take care of it after V helps them take over the company. What this leads to is V isolated on a testing facility in space. Arasaka removes Johnny, but doesn't revert the damages his consciousness has done, and V is still dying, with 6 months left. The final choice V receives is a grim one. Either to return to Night City without Johnny, fully aware of their rapidly declining lifespan, or to remain on the facility and have their personality copied just as Johnny's was for eventual further use. Either one leaves V manipulated as a pawn and dying. This is the bad ending, and the only ending which makes me come close to understanding the other bad ending. One of the philosophers I name dropped earlier so you think I was smart was Camus, who wrote in probably his most famous passage that the only real question in philosophy, the most serious and important one for us as individuals, is the question of suicide. On the balcony with Johnny, deciding what options are on the table, V has the choice to pick none of them and find their own way out of the situation. As per existentialism, this is treated as a tragedy and largely as a wrong, bad choice. After every ending, as the credits scroll, you get these video voicemails from all the most notable characters and companions you met in your story, and as you can imagine, the calls you receive if you pick this option are heartbreaking.
I get it. Why you wanted to leave this place once and for all. but still, V. Did you even think about, what happens when... Shit, I can't do this.
This was never a real option, never a real ending, and a philosopher would say that this is because all of these endings are an attempt to build a life of meaning for V. Every other option brings V towards some goal or closer towards some meaning. Even the Arasaka ending theoretically includes the possibility of V's consciousness being brought back to life or V returning to Night City to make amends in their dying months. It's the most grim ending by far, but it's an ending with meaning theoretically. If you have 6 months to live, at least you can stop making videos for 6 months, disappear from your YouTube channel, and hide in a cave playing Baldur's Gate 3. You can find meaning even in the worst of Cyberpunk's real endings, but not in death. Unless you're Johnny Silverhand, that is. There are 2 endings that Johnny can encourage you to take depending on your quest progression and relationship with him built through dialogue choices you make throughout the game. In every ending except 2, the worst ending and the Phantom Liberty ending, V finds a way deep below Arasaka Tower to a facility which allegedly could separate V from Johnny. Johnny proposes a rerun, a fight to the death back through Arasaka Tower with his old friends that he blew the tower up with and died with 57 years ago. However, if you're real close to Johnny, you do his personal missions, you treat him well, you trust him, you can unlock a secret ending by waiting 5 minutes at the ending selection dialogue prompt, after which point Johnny will interrupt your deliberation.
Kinda tough deciding which of your friends get to die, isn't it? Good news is you got this one chum who's already dead. And he'd be honored to join you on a wild suicide run.
You and Johnny fight your way down yourselves, and by yourselves I mean yourself, bringing Johnny along for the ride. This path is naturally the most difficult, but it is the most in line with a V who learns nothing, who still yearns to be that Night City legend to go out in a blaze of glory. This is a really fun and cool ending, and it's an ending which in a way still reflects existentialist ideas. V chooses their own destiny, chooses to go out in that blaze of glory, hopefully this time, unlike Jackie, for V rather than for any external validation. Once Arasaka's defenses have been broken, once cybernetic juggernaut Atom Smasher has been beaten in a final boss fight, V and Johnny can cross over into cyberspace to decide how to proceed. In order for one consciousness to live, one consciousness must be let go into cyberspace. There's a unique ending for if V gives up their own body and fully gives Johnny control, this ending being by far the most puzzling and almost out of place ending in the game. It makes sense if one's characterization of V is one who has no more life to live, nothing really to live for, but that to me just feels like the quick way out ending with extra steps. My Vs would never do anything like this because of Pan Am, or Judy, or even for Jackie. V deserves an ending, a real ending. Not a walk into the darkness to never return and let an old ghost play guitar ending. On the other side of things, if you let Johnny walk, V emerges as a Night City legend, as the man who fought through Arasaka Tower and won. Rich, famous, but still dying. This is a good ending if and only if you believe, honestly, that the fame is worth it. That living a meaningful life was about legacy. In other words, if you think of things the way Johnny did, but why would you? I know that people love the sequence of storming Arasaka Tower solo, and that's super cool and it's cinematic and badass, but these endings, like the Arasaka or gun endings, feel like V hasn't really learned too much over the course of the story and your playtime. To me, the only true endings come from moving on. When I talked briefly about Phantom Liberty, I mentioned that the US government promised V a cure to their condition if they handed So-Mi in. And if you do so, they actually do make good on their promise. V is transported to the East Coast where procedures are done on them which remove Johnny's consciousness and heal the damage it caused, ensuring that V can live out a full natural lifespan. But it's 2 years later. 2 years where everyone V knew in Night City had no idea where they were. Everyone has either moved on or hates V for abandoning them without a word. Making things worse, the operation performed on V made them now incompatible with cyberware, meaning that they have no chance in coming back to Night City as anything other than the street NPCs you just spent 80 to 100 hours blowing up. This ending is the polar opposite of the Johnny endings. Rather than living on as a Night City legend, you live on as a humble nobody. Just like with those endings, you lose a lot, and there is an initial inclination to believe these endings are bad, or at least missing something important. You can interpret these endings as good or as bad, depending on how you interpret V's internal goals and desires. If your V wanted fame more than anything, the Johnny ending is a good one, despite what you still lack at the end of it all. If all you wanted was to survive, the Phantom Liberty ending makes a lot of sense. You live a full and long life, even if you can't do it blasting people across the pavement for money, or do it with very many of the friends you made throughout the game. What's important for our purposes here is that these endings aren't good or bad, but that they're both V's choice, and that they can both, theoretically, lead to a happy and fulfilling life. That is the existentialist takeaway that makes neither of these endings the quote-unquote bad option. Going back to Pan Am, we reached the last and my favorite ending for Cyberpunk 2077. Leaving Night City feels like the most appropriate conclusion to V's arc of beginning the game, especially as a corpo or street kid, enveloped in the ethos of Night City, fully bought into its promises and its lies, and then through the tragedies and experiences and connections that V makes, they decide to leave it all behind and find happiness elsewhere with the people that they've come to call family. It's the most happy ending in my opinion, and the ending that signals the most character development. This ending ties up the political themes, the philosophical themes, and the personal themes all so nicely that I just can't imagine any other ending being considered the true ending. It's just too clean. There was a time in which I would have said Cyberpunk 2077's content as a story was underdeveloped, that its themes and ideas were not fleshed out or consistent across its disparate side jobs and main jobs. With this ending and these themes all in mind, I can no longer hold this opinion. It all works. It's all great. I kinda love this game, guys. Finally, after all this time. I think the big takeaway for me in regards to my experience with Cyberpunk is that it's worth reevaluating games you disliked every now and again. This isn't just because, as all the marketing for Cyberpunk insisted, your least favorite games can be fixed, but because the base content of Cyberpunk itself, the stuff that remained unchanged, can resonate differently with different people at different points in their lives. When I played it the first time, I thought that the story of the game was vapid and scattered, rudimentary and obvious. I think it's interesting to consider what exactly sparked my openness to changing my ideas here. One part of me believes it was my own life experiences causing me to re-examine my own thoughts on it. Another thinks that I never would have been open to the game being good narratively if it hadn't become good mechanically. Where the line there exactly was is an interesting thing to think about, but either way, I love this game now where I hated it a mere 2 years ago, largely for reasons outside of the changes that were made. It resonates now in ways that it never had before. It hits, it slaps. I'm glad I managed to finish my video on it, and honestly, I'm at least partially glad I had to rewrite it so many times, because it made me reflect on how much my tastes and standards change over time. I just wish I had managed to finish this version of the video before 2 full business quarters had passed. Jesus Christ. Thank you so much for watching. This was a fun one, and next time we're going back to the mods. Hoping that this long a break is a one-time thing and I can get fully back into the swing of things this year. As always, as usual, I could not do anything I do without my patrons. Thank you so much to Adam Souza, An Entire Box of Salt, Autumn Vector, Bastard27, Bear Van Helsing, Carskill Golden, Dream Cream, It's Ducktastic, Jack Bradley, Jacob Dulick, Jaden Graham, Michael Aversa, Mike Woods, Ryan Little, Spritz, and Talia Hemke. Links for everything are in the description. I'm out of here. I got work to do. See ya.